Obama, is your position the same as Hillary Clinton's?
Yeah, there are a couple things I would add. Comprehensive immigration reform is something that I've worked on extensively. 2 years ago, we were able to get a bill out of the Senate. I was one of a group of senators that helped to move it through, but it died in the House this year because it was used as a political football instead of a way of solving a problem. Nothing happened. And so there are a couple of things that I would just add to what Senator Clinton said. Number one, it is absolutely critical that we tone down the rhetoric when it comes to the immigration debate, because there has been an undertone that has been ugly. Oftentimes, it has been directed at the Hispanic community. We have seen hate crimes skyrocket in the wake of the immigration debate as it's been conducted in Washington, and that is unacceptable. We are a nation of laws and we are a nation of immigrants, and we can reconcile those two things. So we need comprehensive reform. We need comprehensive reform, and that means stronger border security. It means that we are cracking down on employers that are taking advantage of undocumented workers because they can't complain if they're not paid a minimum wage. They can't complain if they're not getting overtime. Worker safety laws are not being observed. We have to crack down on those employers, although we also have to make sure that we do it in a way that doesn't lead to people with Spanish surnames being discriminated against. So there's got to be a safeguard there. We have to require that undocumented workers who are provided a pathway to citizenship not only learn English, pay back taxes, and pay a significant fine, but also that they're going to the back of the line so that they're not getting citizenship before those who have applied legally. Which raises two last points. Number one, it is important that we fix the legal immigration system, because right now we've got a backlog that means years for people to apply legally. And what's worse is we keep on increasing the fees so that if you've got a hardworking immigrant family, they've got to hire a lawyer, they've got to pay thousands of dollars in fees, they just can't afford it. And it's discriminatory against people who have good character, we should want in this country, but don't have the money. So we've got to fix that. The second thing is we have to improve our relationship with Mexico and work with the Mexican government so that their economy is producing jobs on that side of the border. And the problem that we have is that we have had an administration that came in promising all sorts of leadership on creating a U.S.-Mexican relationship. And frankly, President Bush dropped the ball. He has been so obsessed with Iraq that we have not seen the kinds of outreach and cooperative work that would ensure that the Mexican economy is working not just for the very wealthy in Mexico, but for all people. And that's a policy that I'm going to change when I'm president of the United States.
Senator Obama, we're going to stay with this topic. I want to have John King ask another question. Go ahead, John.
I want to stay on the issue, but move to a controversial item that was not held up when the immigration debate collapsed in Washington, and that is the border fence. To many Americans, it is a simple question of sovereignty and security. America should be able to keep people out that it doesn't want in. But as you know, in this state, especially if you go to the south of here along the border, and in other border states, to many people, it's a much more personal question. It could be a question of their livelihood, could be a question of cross-border trade, might be an issue to a rancher of property rights, might be a simple question of whether someone can take a walk or a short drive to see their family members. Senator, back in 2006, you voted for the construction of that fence. As you know, progress has been slow. As President of the United States, would you commit tonight that you will finish the fence and speed up the construction, or do you think it's time for a President of the United States to raise his or her hand and say, you know what, wait a minute, let's think about this again. Do we really want to do this?
Well, I think both Senator Obama and I voted for that as part of the immigration debate. And having been along the border for the last week or so, in fact, last night I was at the University of Texas at Brownsville. And this is how absurd this has become under the Bush administration, because, you know, there is a smart way to protect our borders and there is a dumb way to protect our borders. And what I learned last night when I was there with Congressman Ortiz is that the University of Texas at Brownsville would have part of its campus cut off. This is the kind of absurdity that we're getting from this administration. I know it because I've been fighting with them about the northern border. Their imposition of passports and other kinds of burdens are separating people from families, interfering with business and commerce, the movement of goods and people. So what I've said is that I would say, wait a minute, we need to review this. There may be places where a physical barrier is appropriate. I think when both of us voted for this, we were voting for the possibility that where it was appropriate and made sense, it would be considered. But as with so much, the Bush administration has gone off the deep end. And they are, unfortunately, coming up with a plan that I think is counterproductive. So I would have a review. I would listen to the people who live along the border, who understand what it is we need to be doing to protect our country.
Let me go on, and again, sorry, John.
Does that mean that you think your vote was wrong or the implementation of it was wrong? Because as you know, when they first built the fence in San Diego area, it only went so far. And what it did was it stopped the people coming straight up the path of where that was built, and they simply moved. And California's problem became Arizona's problem.
But you know, John, there's a lot we've learned about technology and smart fencing. You know, there is technology that can be used instead of a physical barrier. It requires us having enough personnel along the border so that people can be supervising a certain limited amount of space and will be able to be responsive in the event of, you know, people attempting to cross illegally. And I think that the way that the Bush administration is going about this, filing eminent domain actions against landowners and municipalities, makes no sense. So what I have said is, yes, there are places when, after a careful review, again, listening to the people who live along the border, there may be limited places where it would work. But let's deploy more technology and personnel instead of the physical barrier. I frankly think that will work better, and it will give us an opportunity to secure our borders without interfering with family relations, business relations, recreation, and so much else that makes living along the border, you know, wonderful. And the people who live there need to have a president who understands it, will listen to them, and be responsive.
All right, Senator Clinton. Senator Obama, go ahead, please.
Well, this is an area where Senator Clinton and I almost entirely agree. I think that the key is to consult with local communities, whether it's on the commercial interests or the environmental stakes of creating any kind of barrier. And the Bush administration is not real good at listening. That's not what they do well. And so I will reverse that policy. As Senator Clinton indicated, there may be areas where it makes sense to have some fencing. But for the most part, having border patrols, surveillance, deploying effective technology, that's going to be the better approach. Now, the one thing I do have to say, though, about this issue is it is very important for us, I think, to deal with this problem in terms of hundreds of thousands of people coming over the borders on a regular basis, if we want to also provide opportunity for the 12 million undocumented workers who are here. Senator Clinton and I have both campaigned in places like Iowa and Ohio and my home state of Illinois. And I think that the American people want fairness, want justice. I think they recognize that the idea that you're going to deport 12 million people is ridiculous, that we're not going to be devoting all our law enforcement resources to sending people back. But what they do also want is some order to the process. And so we're not going to be able to do these things in isolation. We're not going to be able to deal with the 12 million people who are living in the shadows and give them a way of getting out of the shadows if we don't also deal with the problem of this constant influx of undocumented workers. And that's why I think comprehensive reform is so important. That's the kind of leadership that I've shown in the past. That's the kind of leadership that I'll show in the future. One last point I want to make on the immigration issue, because we may be moving to different topics. Something that we can do immediately that I think is very important is to pass the DREAM Act, which allows children who, through no fault of their own, are here but have essentially grown up as Americans, allow them the opportunity for higher education. I do not want two classes of citizens in this country. I want everybody to prosper. That's going to be a top priority.